Okay, so let's work on creating our activate user handler. So we know that the user has to navigate to the handler we provided to them, the endpoint, sorry. So they have to go to activated. Okay, so let's create the handler that actually will be triggered when they navigate to that endpoint. So I am in my users.go file. So currently we have the register user handler. Okay. Great. So down here, let's deal with the activate user handler. Okay. So of course, it will be a method on application. Okay. So activate. Again, a lot of the things you will see me do here, you would have gotten experience with since it's a similar pattern. So activate user handler. All right. And of course, we need to provide a HTTP that response writer, and of course a request, a pointer to a request. Okay. So what we will do in this handler, we will first parse the request that the client has sent us. Again, this is something we've done many times. So we will parse the plain text activation token. Okay, so we need to parse it so that we can then do some validation on it. So again, following the same pattern, we're going to say var input, and of course it's a struct, and we will simply specify that it takes a token, plain text, okay, which is of course a string, okay, and it will be called, of course, token. Okay, so the token, of course, will be parsed into input, and so now let's go ahead and read it in. So we'll simply say app.read and JSON, and we'll pass in W, we'll pass in R, and of course we will pass in input. Okay, and then of course we'll simply check for any errors, and if there are errors, then we know that we have a bad request. Okay, so bad request response, W, R, an error. And of course, we can't do anything else, so we'll just return. Now, assuming that we get past this stage and the request seems reasonable, we'll go ahead and perform validation on the request. So let's perform some validation. Okay, so I'll create a new validator. Alright, and then I will simply do the validation. So if data that validate token plain text, okay, when I call this, what should I provide to it? Let's see. a validator and the actual plain text token. So validator is V, and the plain text token, of course, is input dot token plain text. Once I do that, then if the validation fails, so if V dot valid, so if it fails, then we know that it's invalid, and so we'll simply say app dot failed validation response WR on V dot errors. And of course, there's nothing else we can do, so we will return. Now, if the validation passes, then we'll go ahead and we will get the user who is associated with this particular token. So let's get the user details of the provided token, or give the client feedback about an invalid token. So maybe the token is not the correct token. Maybe it has expired, and so we need to tell the user that something is wrong. Alright, the user is trying to reuse a token that has already been used. Alright, so that seems reasonable. So how do we do that? Well, we will create a method. So let's call it app that models that users, and this method will be called get for token. In other words, we will get the user who this token belongs to. Okay, why do we want to do that? Well, because we need to update that user's status from activated being false to activated being true. Alright, so we haven't written this method yet. That's what we'll do next. And so this method will simply take data that scope activation, and it will simply take the input token. Alright, so we need those two things for this method to work. Okay, once we provide those two things to this method, it will return an error, a user error. It will return an error. So let's check to see if it's an error. If it is an error, then we need to check to see what kind of error it is, because it could be that the token has expired, or the token is invalid, or it could just be a server error. Right? So let's check. So the first case, we're going to check to see if the errors, that is data that error no record. Okay, so a record not found. And so of course that simply means that there is no user who matches who owns that token that was provided, which means that it's an invalid token. And so we'll simply say v.add error, and we'll say token, and then we'll say something like invalid or expired activation token. Okay. Of course, if that's not the case, then of course let's just say app that failed validation response, so WRV.error. Okay. So if that's not the case, then we'll just use a default, and the default will be that there was some server error, right? Since we don't know exactly what happened. And so we will simply have error. Okay, once we've done that, before we exit, we need to return since there's nothing else we can do. Now let's assume that there are no errors. Then it means that a user was successfully created. We found a user who the token belongs to, which means it's a valid token. So now I can update the user status, right? And that's easy enough. I will simply say user, which is provided to us here, right? Dot activated, and it was false. I'll set it to true, and so now that has been updated, and so now we need to actually write that back to the database to make the change permanent. So let's just save the updated users record in our database, right? And of course we have done that many times, so I'll simply say app.models that user that update. Okay, and so we'll pass in user. Okay, and then of course we need to check to see if there are any problems. So if error not nil, then something went wrong with the update, as we previously discussed. So maybe there was a conflict, maybe multiple updates trying to happen. Anyway, let's check. So let's say errors that is, and so if it is a data that edit conflict, then we need to specify that and say app.edit conflict response, which will simply mean the user will have to try again. All right, the client will have to try again. Otherwise, there is some server error, and so we'll simply say app.server error response, WR, and of course error. Alright, if that's the case, then we'll simply return as usual. And so if we get out of this, it means that the update was successful. Alright, and so if the update was successful, then we will need to delete the token that has just been used, right? So delete the user's token that was used for activation, right? It's already been used. We don't want them to use it again, so we'll simply say, alright, app that models that tokens that delete alpha users. So we wrote this already, and so what we're going to provide is which token type to delete. So we want to delete the token that is of type scoped activation, and for whom? Well, for the user user.id. Okay, okay. So obviously it's telling me invalid type because we have not yet created that user. So where are we? Yeah, if we come down here, alright, invalid type. That's expected because, like I mentioned, we haven't created this get for token method yet. Right? We'll do that later. Alright, so once we have deleted the token for the particular user, and notice it's only for this type of token, the activation token. The user might have other tokens which we don't want to delete. So let's check for errors. So notice the patterns keep repeating, and so you need to understand the patterns that we're using, and then it will make sense. R error. Okay, so there's nothing else we can do here, so let's just return from our handler. Okay, so assuming that the deletion was done properly, so we can now send a response to the client telling them that we have updated their status from false to true. They are now activated. So send a JSON response with the updated details. Okay, and that's easy enough. We've done this many times. App.write JSON. Let's provide W. Let's provide HTTP that status. Okay. And let's say envelope. And the envelope will contain, of course, user. Which is of course a user, and of course we will provide nil. Right, we don't have any headers. And finally, if error not nil, then we will have to say app.server error response and error. Since we're at the end of the handler, we don't need to return because it will return when it hits line 137. Okay, so there's no need for us to put our return here because we are at the end. Okay, so we are set when it comes to this portion. So what we need to do now is to actually create this method that will return or look for a user that matches the token that is passed in. So get for token, that's what we need to create, and that is created of course in our data. So let's go back to data. Let's look for users. All right, and that will be here. Okay. And so what do we want to do? We want to actually return the user who belongs to this token. Okay, so we currently have set, we have matches, we have validation, and let's go down. Okay, let's go down. Okay, so we will leave this for the next video. And so in the next video, we'll go ahead and we will implement this method. So again, just to repeat, we need to actually provide a means to get the user that is linked to the token. Okay, so I'll see you in that video.